Hi, I'm Sydney, and I am a servant of the Almighty God. Continuing this series of recognizing God's omnipotence, today I want to have an episode on what I call the most scalable and massively disruptive information that literally will start a revolution once it is recognized, once it is known. And so you can be a messenger to this information. So first I want to give you, what's this information? Well, I have to draw some parallels, right? We as a civilization have advanced to the point where now we're doing AI. And this is part of the revelation that we have to see the parallels and understand how this disrupts much of the scientific thinking, and eventually even religion will be disrupted by this information. So let me walk you through this. So we have built these advanced machines, right? And so I want to use the example of, that's everywhere, everybody understands, a car, right? We've built a car and it's very useful, but up until recently, that car with all the systems in it would sit there, and we would have to we'd have to go out there and turn that key. So when you turn that key, electricity starts flowing, to that motor that turns the engine and fires off, whether you had you basically your ignition system, whether you use plugs or whatever, but it fires up, that turns the engine, gas comes in, that gas mixer, the car comes alive. And now we have a machine that's useful, but each car needed a driver, somebody to turn that key and then drive that car. Very useful, but each car, remember, needed a driver. We have advanced to the point now where literally we can, right here on the phone, tell that car, hey, I need to leave here at a certain time. And that car can start. I can go sit in the back of the back seat, and the car can take me there. It can say, it can go to parking, and I say, pick me up at this time. So think about that. Here is a car without that artificial intelligence. The car just sits there. It needs intelligence to perform autonomously or semi-autonomously. So in order to do anything by itself, it needs intelligence. Let me take you to the other side now. What science, which is truth, has revealed to us, and I have to make this point here. If you take medicine or you take medical advice, you believe in science, because these things have been revealed. And if you look at the podcast, when I talk about Dmitry Mendeleev and the revelation of the periodic table and all that stuff, we all believe in science. And so this disruption that I'm talking about will even disrupt the way science thinks. And I know it won't be easy, but let me take it step by step. So that car, again, that example of the car sitting there, useful, had to have some intelligence before it can perform some task autonomously or semi-autonomously by itself. Similarly, science has shown us that every living thing, from moss, fish, birds, everything, trees, everything have DNA. So I like to use the example of, or use this analogy, that every living thing can be considered every species can be considered a unique DNA configuration. Because within the DNA, basically holds a code that says whether you're going to have bark, the type of leaves, whether you have scales, your skin, your teeth, everything that's encoded there. So it controls and dictates the physical characteristics of every living thing. Remember, every living thing. But just like that vehicle, we can have this physical DNA configuration implemented in this organism, plant or animal. Without intelligence, it has no usefulness. It just sits there. And so what we have observed in science is that it took billions of years to build this specific intelligence, this specific programming. And it's not as simple as, just like in a car, we have, multiple systems to control the ignition. We have a GPS. We have all these different systems to detect what's around. Similarly, every DNA configuration, every plant, every animal has to know how to perform certain tasks. And these tasks, again, they're varied. And so just without intelligence, what we have is something that sits there. It's like a piece of meat or it's a piece of wood. It's just a cell. From a unicellular to the most complex, it's a cell. It needs it needs programs, right? To use vernacular that we are familiar with. It needs dedicated programs to know what to do and how to perform the very basic task. So it has to have, and these tasks, when we go to more complex animals, things like imprinting, things like procreation, all of these things, again, it's important to recognize not the learned task. These are the things like a bird building a nest. These are the things like birds figuring out which plants, and that even that symbiosis, all of these things, the things that they do naturally. Now, many of these tasks happen at different levels. Just like in the car, you have programs that are executing, that are responsible for certain functions that the car itself doesn't have to be aware of. We do not control our heart pumping blood all around the system, sending, that whole process of oxygenation and going back around the arteries and veins, our immune system. So there are all these programs in every living thing. Every living thing has these programs, and I like to reference you to that article you can find on YouTube. It's called In the Mind of Plants. That we are recognizing today that everything has memory. Unfortunately, and I'm not sure we will ever get to that, we cannot review, we cannot access, we cannot say how much memory, gigabytes, terabytes, whatever, is available in any living thing. We don't even know what the memory looks like. We know there's memory, obviously, because an intelligence is tied to memory. It has to be information stored in what I call accessible memory. If you can't access it in your memory, or we can't go out on the web, we don't know it. So every living thing, we talk about the DNA, and so there's this whole theory that somehow DNA randomly created all these things, as a product of, but there has to be an intelligence. Even adaptation has to be directed by intelligence. So somewhere, just as within us, we have these programs that direct our immune system, direct all these autonomic functions within our bodies, every living being, every living thing has DNA and it has memory. In that memory are specific programs designed to automate functions that whatever the organism needs. And so what we're seeing when we look at something that's alive, it's that physical form and an intelligence that's embedded within that. This is what we refer to as instinct, right? We say, oh yeah, it's instinct. Think about that. That instinct is a series. It's a system of highly developed programming, highly developed programs specific to that organism. This is why it knows how to perform the task that keeps it alive. I mean, even what to eat, how to eat, the digestion happens. So when you see these animals, like ruminants with the multiple stomachs and all this stuff, yeah, but there are programs, intelligence that direct that. If it did not have intelligence, these functions could not be performed, and often in very specific sequences. So what we're seeing is highly developed programming. Now, some people then say, well, then something is in control because it designed this program. But think about it again. Do we want that car that we have to go and like the early forms of a robot, or we have a joystick and we controlling that? That was not the point. The point is to build it smart enough that it can operate fully autonomously without any interaction from us. At that point, especially when it has the ability to procreate, right? And so when you hear things about computers becoming alive, forget that. They cannot procreate. So the idea that it's sentient, it understands itself and all this other stuff, if it really is a challenge to make it reproduce itself. And we know no computer today is going to manufacture get the silicon and dope it, and also all the external components. It needs multiple factories, right? We don't have one factory that makes every component. And when you go into your any robot, a car, your cell phone, any of these things, they are made by multiple factories. So a cell phone is not going to make itself. But if you had billions of years to build this, and you can build that first cell and build a specific program so that cell knows, okay, this is what I do. Even cell division, without that program going, if that program goes crazy, I think that's what we call cancer, right? It just goes crazy and starts acting. But again, so we have to see that everything has to have that intelligence, and the intelligence is not just at a macro level. This person is, because that's the smart, or that person who is not as intelligent, there are all these systems that are operating independent of their thought processes. And from the very smallest animal, we can always talk about an earthworm, a spider, and you look through the podcast, I have lots of examples. But what we see is intelligence that's bundled specific to every DNA configuration. Think about that. That intelligence had its information that's stored in memory, which we currently cannot access, but that is what's responsible for the behavior, the instinct of every living thing. Think about it. From the time it's born, that imprinting, even to procreation, and even the aging processes are all dictated by that programming. That programming, so it knows and it performs repeatedly and perfectly as designed. Now, again, even with that, you can have free will because you design something, but then of course you would give it a set of rules. You would have the prophets, the messengers that says, you are special, you understand these things, you can develop these things. Now, here are the rules. These are the commandments. Thou shalt not create any God beside the Creator. And I'll get into the disruptions that have to come as part of this revolution. So you have these rules, these governing principles that are given to these organisms that you create. You give them autonomy, full autonomy. Within us, you have these systems running, but those systems are not controlled externally. Unless, of course, we ask, we make that connection. We say, we recognize the Creator and we connect with the Creator, not His prophets, not the prophets. And I say His, but really it does not matter. Him, her, it does not really matter, because at that point it's the Creator, not the messengers. And you see, what has happened in the world is that the messengers, those who through faith, or rather they were sent to bring that message, we associate with that. We make them, that's my prophet. And now that prophet becomes the God. But none of the prophets ever said, I am the Creator. They all exalted the Father, the Creator. They all exalted us, that they all asked us and said that there are rules that we should follow. Because as gifted as we are with all the wonderful gifts that we were given, we need to understand these rules. So let me get into the disruption now. Okay, so we understand that from the single cell, there are embedded programs in that memory, which we can see in that video I'm going to reference again, in the mind of plants, makes us aware that there's memory within every living thing. And without that programming, it's just a lump of cells. Without that intelligence, without those programs, just like that car, it just sits there, it can do, but something has to, for it to operate autonomously, it needs that programming. That programming has been built over billions of years. And this is why we have autonomy, free will, but those programs run within all of us. Think about whatever you do, whenever you think about instinct, that's the the intrinsic intelligence that's built into each and every one of us. Now let me get into the disruption. This information is scientifically based. We cannot access memory today, else we'd be able to read this thing. So it's beyond the scope of our current scientific methods. But we know, just like we knew that we found out that the earth was not the center of the universe, or the earth was not flat. It's a similar thing. It's a scientific fact that intelligence is the driver for cells or any machines. In this case, in all living things can be considered machines that require some specific well-designed programs in order to operate. Both, and again, this is the instinctive stuff, not the stuff that's learned after. Okay, so we have to recognize from a scientific standpoint, just as science reveals truth, that everything has memory. And in that memory is the information that becomes the intelligence. This is the intrinsic intelligence that direct the functions in their life. So here comes the disruptions. Religions from the inception, especially today, are so divisive. And I say that the divisiveness is based on the prophet worship. We worship the prophet. We make the prophet God. We make the prophet who we want. It looks like us, the prophet, and so we now pray to the prophet and we fight wars because my prophet is better than your prophet and all of this stuff. But each of the prophets was speaking of the Creator, the magnificence, the omnipotent Creator. And so these things in time, when we all exalt and pray to the same, because there's one Creator, we see one set of DNA that's configured. As you know, as the message that I received, diversity is His. As servants, we must honor that diversity. We see the one Creator, because the DNA, even though he loves diversity, obviously, we see lots of in everything, snakes, spiders, us, the races, we see all the diversity. He delights in it. And so when we reference the same Creator, there is no difference. It really brings us together. And we become aware of the truths that brings science and the foundation of religion, because you recognize the Creator developed these programs that runs everything autonomously. It's not like a robotic thing where it's like, well, he's going to come in and do this stuff. He built these things, and here, these systems all have, like we see, they gets pushed to one side and they react. And so the earth is not going to die because we put a lot of pollutants out into it. No, when we add these things into, we get affected. Our ecosystem will react accordingly over time. And the time frame is not based on our lifespan. 1,000 years, millions of years. So religions will get very, very, this is this concept we have in IT of globally scalable. So this information applies to every living thing. So it's globally scalable to everything on earth. Every living being is impacted by this information and massively disrupted. It disrupts religions. It becomes a revolution of its own, because now there are universal commandments that apply to all of us from the Creator about learning to love each other, the true brotherhood of mankind. We revere knowledge. We revere truth. We absolutely would not have liars leading us. We will not follow liars, those who are, take liberties and can be fact-checked again and again. Why would we follow them? Because like science is showing us the magnificence of our Creator. We must learn to follow truth. Now, the disruption to science. This information obviously changes the way science has to look at everything, because recognizing we accept DNA, right? Before it was even discovered, we knew there was something that basically was responsible for the form of every living thing. We found out that's DNA. Now we are doing our own AI, artificial intelligence, and so we must recognize intrinsic intelligence, which we call instinct very, very often, that exist in memory, because that's where information is stored. So every living thing has memory. So along with DNA comes memory. We don't know how, we can't identify it, but we can recognize that intelligence is based on information stored in memory. And so every living thing, every cell, and we don't know how these systems are designed. Just like someone looking at a car. If you were a visitor from another planet and you see a car, you would not know all the interactions between the different systems that made this vehicle. Of course, it's metal or whatever material, but it's not living. But it would operate. You would not know what operating system, what are all the components of that makes up the intelligence that allows that machine to operate autonomously. Similarly, we are, in a sense, aliens to ourselves, because we don't know that where is that memory. We know the information is stored within us because we can regurgitate it. I can I can memorize my credit card numbers. I can recognize, so many numbers, your driver's license, social security, all these numbers. So these are things we know are stored in memory. Well, we don't know if it's the same memory that learned information is stored, or is it a separate memory? Like the car, right? We have this memory in the car, so the car can even wake up, because before we had to turn the switch on. We had to turn the switch on before the car came alive, right? Because before that, systems were dead. Now the car can wake itself up because we've designed systems like that. So we may have different kinds of memory within us, but for our current state of science, we cannot identify the memory in any living thing. But we know that information must be stored in memory because it can be retrieved. And so science now will have a problem, because when you see the concept of evolution is that, well, it just randomly went a certain way. Now you hear Mother Nature did it. But something had to design. When you come to this, the recognizing that intelligence, each thing has a specific, a worm does not try to be a bird. A fish does not try to be a snake. So what we see is that there is a very specific intelligence that is embedded in each species that had to be designed. And it's not just, when I say intelligence, it's like within us. We don't control our immune system. We don't control many of the autonomic processes. These are the things when I talk about intelligence that had to be designed, and it's embedded, implanted in every, along with that specific DNA configuration, there is a specific memory with information stored in it, so that this thing becomes instinctive. It does not have to think about it, it just knows. And if you follow the podcast, you will see it talk about this, that the Corolla spider, the fish that can shoot its prey. When we look at spiders building webs, we look at all of these things. All these things we say instinctive. Well, think instinct is really intrinsic intelligence, which is embedded along with DNA. So you have a physical form and specific information embedded in memory that enables this creature to do everything from the time it is, that switch is thrown. We don't know how that switch is thrown, because that's the difference between life and death. But when that switch is thrown, all that memory, that sophisticated system of programming is already embedded. This will disrupt everything. And so it may take time, but this information is now, it's available now. You know it. And so you can means test it. You can look at this and recognize, yes, nothing comes alive without specific programming, this instinctive stuff, which is intrinsic intelligence embedded along with DNA in every living thing. This disrupts the world. But it brings us together. This is not about hate, because with the one creator, we recognize the brotherhood of mankind. Truth matters, like science is revealed to us. Because remember, I have to say this again, all our sciences are journeys of discovery. We did not create DNA. We did not create silicon. We did not create the forces that enable the reactions that provide all the materials from aerospace to medicine. All of these things were already there. We discover it. They were designed and implemented. They were created. These are revelations to us that enable us to use these facilities to recognize what's already out there, to empower us so that we can be better. And as all of nature shows us, it's designed for the benefit without race, religion, or any of these other things. It's for all of us. This is the revolution that's coming. We just have to recognize this information and challenge the scientific, challenge religion. Because eventually, when we become truly enlightened, we recognize all of this, and it brings us, like I said, the true brotherhood of man, where truth reigns and principles are more important than persons. We do not just follow anyone blindly because we know the principles. We have the commandments, the principles of truth, of honesty, of living together, of doing as you would be done by. So I hope I got this clear. And again, pick up a copy of my last book, and there will be a new one coming out that goes more into more detail into a lot of this stuff, right? You pick up the humanity's inflection point, and again, here are these principles that came to me years ago, so that of course, God is generic, and religion is specific brands. Our science, and this was revealed to me years ago, our science reveals God's methods, right? The key to meeting God's expectation of us is self-control. and diversity is his. As servants, we must all honor his diversity. I wanted to catch the right word. And so all of this fits in with the unification of science and religion and the brotherhood of mankind through education, through recognizing those commandments that make us better. I want to thank you once again for taking the time to review this and spread the word. Pick up a copy of the book, and I will have information on my new book that's upcoming. And again, thank you very much. Until next time, may God bless us all. Thank you.